Sometime around 500 BC, a group of Indo-European languages began to break away from the group, undergoing a number of important voicing changes that changed stops to fricatives, where p's would become f's, and vice versa. The Proto-Germanic language was born, and effectively this language would become what we know today as Icelandic, English, Dutch, Norwegian, etc., etc. These very early voicing rules explain the relationship between phrases like paternal piscus and fatherly fishes, from fiskas. They are cognate, and they're intimately related, and these early voicing rules, such as Grimm's Law and Werner's Law, explain why they're related and how they're related. Other languages amongst the Indo-European fold today include Punjabi, for one, French, Italian, and, of course, as I mentioned, the Germanic languages. It also includes the Celtic languages, and a number of others strewn throughout the globe. It is known as Indo-European because it stretches all the way from India throughout Europe. The Indian side of things mostly sprang from Sanskrit, which was one of the ancient languages that was heavily studied in the 18th century by philologists, that led to the discovery of Indo-European as a field of study and as a proto-language, and which ultimately led to the study of Proto-Germanic as well.
Fellas, wat joh? Ik wil jou boeken aan Frans Keus en die gosse zij drachten die wachten naar Minano.
Wieso koos willis du?
Ik wil jou koos zij maken die Mikolomelko.
Ja, godas ist. Vi have him as Werliko, fellow sterker husa and the fellow godano koos.
Cyrus godas, nu ik wil jou tu mesalina Frans Brunos koos en die twaiste castus russo is wals.
Nu tvoj russo, ja. Ik zal je de tankas verbogenstinas.
Danke, siehst du heila.
Vi är heila, friend. Ik dank je dat du kommer nu.
Somewhere in the 2nd century AD, the Proto-Germanic language began to undergo a number of shifts. The East Germanic branch had already broken away a number of centuries prior, becoming Gothic, while the rest of the languages remained more or less uniform as what might be known as a Northwest Germanic branch. The West and North Germanic languages didn't really begin to differentiate until the late 5th century AD, where you then find a Proto-Norse, a Proto-North Germanic, and a Proto-West Germanic. Prior to that, in the earliest inscriptions, they might best be described as Proto-Northwest Germanic, because they represent something that more or less encompasses aspects of both of those languages. It can't be seen diachronically as a predecessor to either of them. Now, calling the earliest runic inscriptions Proto-Norse, rather than Proto-West Germanic as they more properly ought to be, exists more as an easy categorical distinction rather than a real linguistic one. There isn't anything linguistically to differentiate between West and North Germanic until, as I said before, the late 5th century. Prior to that, they would have been effectively the same, and in fact, in places as where, for instance, the golden horns of Gallichus were found, they would have been inhabited majorly by what would be effectively West Germanic-speaking Ingvaeans. So, perhaps, the ancestor of the individual who carved many of these might have gone on to become a West Germanic speaker, might have gone on to, say, conquer England. However, we can't know this, and for the ease of categorical differentiation, it's easy to look at that landmass and say today it's inhabited by North Germanic speakers, by people whose languages have evolved from Old Norse. Ergo, the languages we find in the earliest inscriptions should be understood as Proto-Norse.
wil je bugnan fair kuur aan die gossa zij dragen wachten minano.
Where's queer weles tu?
Ik wil je kuur zij makothi miklomenok.
Go the rest. We're haviam werlico, fellow starka russo, and the fellow godana queer.
Saira godar, no ik wil je meer salian fair bruno kuur aan die twice takastus russo erware.
Ja. No twai russo, ik zal je die tanka de buge ditinos.
Danko, siehst du heilo.
Ja, pies heilo, friend. Tanka du after to koiman.
Now, the Gothic language is of great importance for a number of salient reasons, the most notable of which is the fact that it's the first sizable corpus of early Germanic language for which we can sink our teeth into. It exists in a number of forms, a number of early inscriptions which might be Gothic but are relatively ambiguous. However, the most important fragment, the most important document we have is Wulfila's early Germanic Bible, his early Gothic Bible, written circa 350-360 AD, so it is a 4th century document. It only exists in a 6th century copy, but it more than likely represents very closely the language that would have been spoken by Wulfila in the 4th century. Thus, it's very important for us to use Gothic to reconstruct Proto-Germanic, since it's only a few centuries removed from what would have been effectively a common language, and Gothic itself would have remained mutually intelligible with all the other Germanic languages, right up until the migration period.
Hiles!
Ik wil je bugnan frins kuus aan die gossa zij dragen wachten minana.
Ja, wieso schools willst du?
Ik wil je kuus zij makothi miklomenok.
Godsist. Vi saviam weerlika filu godana quis, jacha fila starka russa.
Zeros gos, nu ik wil jou voor misalian frins bruns kuus, ja twa mestre gosse is warze.
Ja. Nu twa russa. Ik zal je die tankas voor bugianstines.
Danke, siehst du heil.
Ja. Vi sail, friend. Dank du after the queman.